When your fiancé's father slides a document across his mahogany table and says, "Co-sign her $180,000 student debt or there's no wedding," most men would panic. I just smiled and said, "Got it." Then I took back my grandmother's ring and walked out. What Richard Wellington didn't know was that I'd just recorded everything, and his gambling debts were about to become very public knowledge. The meeting had started innocently enough. Victoria had asked me to stop by her parents' estate in Riverside Hills for what she called pre-wedding financial planning. I should have known better. Nothing involving the Wellingtons was ever innocent. Richard's study reeked of old leather and older money, the kind of inherited wealth that comes with an automatic sense of superiority. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than my first car, his silver hair perfectly styled, his Yale law degree gleaming in its frame behind him like a threat. "Alex," he began, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for people he considered beneath his daughter, "we need to discuss Victoria's financial obligations before this marriage proceeds." I'd been expecting the usual prenup nonsense. Rich families protect their money. I understood that. What I didn't expect was the stack of loan documents he slid across the polished wood. "Victoria has some outstanding educational expenses from her various ventures," he continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "Graduate school, the hospitality management program in Switzerland, that entrepreneurship course in London, standard investments in her future." I flipped through the papers, my software architect brain automatically processing the numbers. $180,000 in student loans, spread across 6 different institutions, with interest rates that made my mortgage look generous. "These are all in her name," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "For now." Richard leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. "But marriage creates shared obligations, doesn't it? We simply want to ensure you're committed to Victoria's financial well-being." There it was, the trap disguised as a test. Sign these papers, become legally responsible for nearly 200 grand of debt I had nothing to do with, or prove I wasn't worthy of their precious daughter. "And if I don't sign?" Richard's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Then perhaps you should reconsider whether you're ready for marriage to someone of Victoria's caliber." I've always been good at reading people. It comes with the territory when you're debugging code. You learn to spot the logic errors, the places where something doesn't add up. Right now, every instinct I had was screaming that something was very, very wrong. "Mind if I take a minute to review these?" "Of course." Richard gestured magnanimously as if he was doing me a favor. "Take your time. Victoria should be home from her spa appointment soon. I'm sure she'd love to celebrate your decision." While he pretended to shuffle papers, I activated the voice recorder on my phone, completely legal in Connecticut, where only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Richard Wellington was about to learn that his son-in-law-to-be hadn't gotten where he was by being stupid. The documents were even worse than I'd initially thought. Not just co-signing, but assuming full financial responsibility if Victoria defaulted. There were clauses about asset seizure, wage garnishment, joint liability for accumulated interest. It was a financial death trap disguised as wedding paperwork. "These terms seem comprehensive," I said carefully. "The Wellington family believes in being thorough." Richard's tone suggested this conversation was a formality, that any man worthy of his daughter would sign without question. What exactly did Victoria spend $180,000 on? For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable. "As I mentioned, educational investments. She's always been ambitious about her personal development. I'd been with Victoria for 2 years. She'd mentioned graduate school in passing, but never anything about Switzerland or London, never anything about 6 figures worth of educational debt. My fiancé, it seemed, had been keeping secrets. I'll need to discuss this with Victoria first." "I'm afraid that won't be necessary." Richard's mask slipped just slightly, revealing the bully underneath the Yale polish. "This is between you and me, man to man. Victoria doesn't need to be burdened with the details. The details of her own debt? The details of your commitment to this family. He stood up, using his height to intimidate. Alex, let me be frank. Victoria is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. The Wellington name carries obligations. If you're not prepared to meet those obligations, then what? Then perhaps you're not the right man for our daughter. I looked at him for a long moment, this pompous ass who thought he could buy and sell people like stock options. Then, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the engagement ring, my grandmother's Art Deco diamond, worth more in sentimental value than anything money could buy. You know what, Richard? You're absolutely right. I set the ring on his desk with a soft click. I'm not the right man for your daughter. At least, not the version of your daughter who hides $180,000 in debt from her fiancé. Richard's face went pale, then red. Now see here? No, you see here. I stood up, pocketing my phone. I'm a software architect, not a sucker. I debug problems for a living, and right now, I'm looking at a pretty significant bug in your family's operating system. I turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Richard? Next time you want to threaten someone's financial future, you might want to make sure yours is secure first. Amazing what public records can tell you about a man's gambling habits. I left him standing there, mouth open, probably wondering how much I actually knew about his weekly trips to Mohegan's Sun and the mounting debts he thought he'd hidden from his family. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months of wedding planning. Relief. Pure, clean relief. It wasn't until I was halfway home that the anger set in. 3 days after I called off the wedding, I hired a private investigator. Not for closure, for ammunition. What he found in that hotel surveillance footage made me realize my fiancée wasn't just a liar. She was a predator. And she'd picked the wrong prey. Dennis Murphy had the look of a man who'd seen it all and forgotten most of it on purpose. Retired Hartford police detective, 25 years on the force, now running background checks for divorce lawyers and insurance companies. His office in downtown Hartford smelled like coffee and disappointment, but his referrals were solid. So your ex-fiancée has secret debt and you want to know what else she's hiding, he said, reviewing the notes I'd given him. Standard cheating spouse investigation? Start there, I said. But I want everything. Financial records, social media, known associates. I've been with this woman for 2 years and apparently know nothing about her. Dennis quoted me a daily rate that would have made me wince 6 months ago. Now, with $180,000 in debt obligations no longer hanging over my head, it felt like pocket change. How thorough do you want me to be? Thorough enough that I never get surprised again. 3 days later, Dennis called. You better come in, and bring a strong stomach. The photographs were spread across his desk like a poker hand from hell. Victoria and James Blackwood, married James Blackwood, father of twin daughters, pillar of the Dam community, entering the Riverside Grand Hotel. Leaving 3 hours later. Entering again 2 days later. A pattern going back 6 months. Always the same hotel, always the same room number. 5-star establishment, Dennis said dryly. Your ex has expensive tastes in adultery. I picked up one of the photos, Victoria laughing at something James had said as they walked through the lobby, her hand on his arm, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen her in months. How long? Based on what I can document? 6 months minimum. Could be longer, but they got sloppy around March. Started using the hotel restaurant, valet parking, leaving digital footprints. Digital footprints? Dennis slid a tablet across the desk. Social media posts. She's been checking in at events where he's also tagged. Charity galas, yacht club parties, tennis tournaments. Either they're both very social, or they're not being careful about creating alibis. I scrolled through the evidence. Victoria at a wine tasting tagged with 15 other people including James. James at a sailing regatta. Victoria visible in the background of 3 different photos. A fundraiser for the children's hospital where they'd been seated at the same table. along with his wife. Christ, she's been flaunting it. Rich people think they're invisible, Dennis said. Especially rich people who've never faced consequences. What about the financial stuff? Dennis pulled out another folder. That's where it gets interesting. Your ex's debt isn't from educational expenses. My hand froze halfway to my coffee cup. What? 3 failed business ventures, boutique marketing consultancy that lasted 8 months, high-end event planning service that folded after she lost a client's deposit, and something called Elite Lifestyle Concierge that never actually launched but somehow burned through $60,000 in startup costs. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She told her father it was graduate school. Maybe she told him that. Or maybe he knows exactly what it is and wanted you to believe otherwise. Dennis leaned back in his chair. Either way, someone's lying to someone. What else? James Blackwood is interesting, investment banker, old Riverside Hills family, married to Catherine Merrill, as in the Merrill shipping fortune. 2 kids, big house on the water, reputation as a devoted family man. Until 6 months ago. Until 6 months ago, Dennis agreed. Want me to keep digging? I looked at the photographs again. Victoria's face in the hotel lobby, radiant with the kind of joy I hadn't seen when she looked at me in months. James Blackwood's hand on her lower back, possessive and casual. Yeah, I said. Keep digging. I want to know everything. Everything's expensive. I've got time and money now. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Dennis gathered up the photographs. Alex? Word of advice from someone who's seen this before. Whatever you're planning, be smarter than they are. Rich people have lawyers, connections, ways of making problems disappear. Good thing I'm not planning to be a problem, I said, standing up. I'm planning to be a solution. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Alex, please call me. I know you're upset about the money thing, but we can work this out. I love you. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Dennis with a note. Add this to the file. Date and timestamp everything. Then I deleted Victoria's text and drove home to start planning. The house felt different now. Bigger, quieter. Mine again in ways it hadn't been since Victoria started leaving her mark on every room. I poured myself a bourbon and sat down at my computer to do what I did best. Gather information and debug problems. Richard Wellington's gambling problem was easier to trace than I'd expected. Public records showed 3 civil suits from creditors in the past 18 months. Property tax records revealed a second mortgage on the family estate. And Connecticut court filings showed him representing fewer high-profile clients than in previous years, usually a sign that a law firm was quietly pushing someone toward retirement. But the real goldmine was in the professional disciplinary records. A complaint filed by a former client alleging misuse of escrow funds, currently under investigation by the State Bar Association. Richard Wellington wasn't just a gambler. He was a gambler who'd started playing with other people's money. I leaned back in my chair, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Victoria's mystery debt. Richard's desperation to make me liable for it. The pressure to sign immediately, without discussion. They weren't just trying to trap me into paying Victoria's bills. They were trying to make me the fall guy for Richard's financial crimes. My phone rang. Dennis. Got something you need to see. How fast can you get back here? 20 minutes. Make it 15. And Alex, you were right to be paranoid. These people aren't just hiding secrets, they're hiding crimes. While Tori was crying to her friends about our broken engagement, I was busy buying the house she'd always dreamed of, the one overlooking the yacht club where she'd humiliated me at parties. But I wasn't buying it for her. I was buying it to destroy everything she thought was hers. The Riverside Heights house had been Victoria's obsession for as long as I'd known her. Colonial Revival, built in 1925, sitting on 2 acres overlooking Long Island Sound with a private dock and unobstructed views of the Riverside Yacht Club. Every time we drove past it, she'd slow down and stare, talking about the parties she'd throw, the garden parties, the way it would look in Architectural Digest. "Someday," she'd always said, "when we're properly established." The someday part was what should have tipped me off. Victoria Wellington had never waited for anything in her life, unless she couldn't afford it. The listing agent, Patricia Knox, was one of those ageless real estate professionals who could smell serious money from 3 towns away. She'd shown Victoria and me through the property twice over the past year, always ending with the same gentle disappointment when we didn't make an offer. This time, I called her directly. "Patricia, it's Alex Morrison. I'd like to make an offer on the Riverside Heights property." A pause. "Of course, Alex. Will Victoria be joining us for the walkthrough?" "Actually, Victoria and I are no longer together. This would be just for me." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Well, the property is still available, though I should mention we've had renewed interest recently. The asking price is $2.8 million. I'll take it. I'm sorry, did you say you'll take it?" "At full asking price. Cash offer, no contingencies, 30-day closing. Can you draw up the paperwork?" Patricia Knox had been selling high-end real estate for 15 years, but I'd apparently managed to render her speechless. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps we should schedule a viewing first. It's been several months since you've seen the property, and a purchase of this magnitude. Patricia, I've run the numbers. I know exactly what I'm buying. And I did. Not just the house, the statement it would make. Victoria had spent 2 years dragging me to yacht club parties, charity galas, and country club dinners, always with that slight edge of apology in her voice when she introduced me. "This is my fiancé, Alex. He's in technology, like I was some kind of embarrassing hobby she'd picked up. The house would change that narrative entirely." I met Patricia at her office that afternoon to sign the preliminary paperwork. She'd recovered her professional composure, but I could see the curiosity burning behind her smile. "If you don't mind my asking, what's driven this sudden decision?" "Change of circumstances," I said, signing my name on form after form. "Turns out I have more disposable income than I realized." 3 hours later, I was the owner-elect of the most envied property in Riverside Hills. The closing was set for 28 days out, just enough time for word to spread through the small, gossipy community that Alex Morrison, the technology guy, had bought the dream house that Victoria Wellington had been coveting for 2 years. I drove straight to Dennis Murphy's office. "You bought the Riverside Heights house?" He looked at me like I'd announced plans to run for president. "Jesus Christ, Alex, that place is legend. My ex-wife dragged me to a charity event there once. Felt like visiting a museum." "It's an investment," I said, which was technically true. "What did you find out about Richard Wellington's Bar Association troubles?" Dennis pulled out a thick file. "Worse than I thought. The complaint isn't just about escrow funds. It's about systematic misappropriation over 18 months. We're talking about client money being used to cover personal gambling debts." He slid a series of bank records across the desk. "Richard's been taking money from client accounts on Friday afternoon, gambling it over the weekend, then replacing it on Monday morning. Except when he loses, the money doesn't get replaced." "How much are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate? 400,000. Maybe more." I studied the records, my programmer's mind automatically tracking the patterns. Withdrawals every Friday, deposits every Monday, gaps where the deposits didn't match the withdrawals. He's been kiting client funds? For over a year. And it's accelerating. The deposits are getting smaller, the gaps are getting bigger. So when he demanded I co-sign Victoria's debt, he wasn't just trying to trap you. He was trying to create a legal buffer. If you're on the hook for her finances, it makes it harder for anyone to trace the money back to him. I leaned back in my chair, seeing the complete picture for the first time. Richard Wellington wasn't just a garden-variety bully. He was a criminal who'd been using his daughter's fake engagement to cover his tracks. "There's more," Dennis said. "James Blackwood isn't just sleeping with your ex. He's been helping her hide money." "What do you mean?" 3 shell companies, all registered to Victoria's maiden name but funded through James's investment accounts. Looks like they've been moving money around to make her debt obligations look smaller than they actually are. Tax fraud? Among other things. Your ex and her boyfriend have been playing games with both state and federal revenue departments. I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction, the same feeling I got when I found the bug that had been crashing a system for weeks. All the pieces were finally visible, and I knew exactly how to fix the problem. Keep digging, I told Dennis. I want documentation on everything. Every transaction, every shell company, every time Richard took money from client accounts. Alex, these people are going to figure out you're investigating them. When they do, they'll realize they picked the wrong mark. I stood up, gathering the papers. Rich people think they're untouchable because they've never met anyone willing to touch them. That's about to change. I drove home through the center of Riverside Hills, past the yacht club where Victoria had introduced me as her technology friend, past the country club where James Blackwood played tennis every Saturday morning with his wife, past the law offices where Richard Wellington was slowly destroying 3 decades of professional reputation. Tomorrow, the entire town would know that Alex Morrison had bought the Riverside Heights house, the house that Victoria Wellington had wanted more than anything else in the world, the house she would never live in. By the time I pulled into my driveway, 3 people had already called to congratulate me on the purchase. Riverside Hills was a small town with big mouths, and news traveled fast. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Heard about the house. We need to talk. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Dennis, then turned off my phone. We'd talk when I was ready. The night James Blackwood cornered me in the yacht club parking lot, his fists clenched and his family's reputation on the line, I didn't run. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos. Your wife already has copies, I said. But the newspapers don't. Yet. I'd been expecting this confrontation since word got out about the house purchase. James Blackwood wasn't the type to let perceived slights go unanswered, and buying the house Victoria had obsessed over was definitely a slight. The Riverside Yacht Club's autumn regatta party was winding down when he found me. I'd attended specifically to be seen, to let the community know that Alex Morrison wasn't hiding in shame after his broken engagement. Instead, I was the newly single owner of the most prestigious address in town. The evening had gone perfectly. 3 separate people had complimented me on the house purchase. 2 yacht club board members had invited me to join their committees. Patricia Knox had made a point of introducing me to potential neighbors as the astute investor who recognized value when he saw it. Victoria had been there too, clinging to James Blackwood's arm while his wife Catherine chatted with friends near the bar. I'd watched them from across the room. Victoria shooting me nervous glances, James pretending I didn't exist, Catherine Blackwood oblivious to the drama playing out around her. I was walking to my car when James materialized from between 2 BMWs, blocking my path. We need to talk, he said. Up close, James Blackwood looked like what he was, old money trying to maintain relevance in a changing world. Expensive suit, perfect teeth, the kind of tan that comes from sailing yachts rather than working construction. He was also 40 pounds heavier than his Princeton rowing photos and losing the battle against male pattern baldness. James, I said pleasantly. Nice party. Your wife seems lovely. His face flushed red. Stay away from Victoria. I'm not anywhere near Victoria. In fact, I haven't spoken to her since I called off our engagement. You know what I mean. He stepped closer, apparently trying to intimidate me. Whatever game you're playing, buying that house, showing up here, it ends now. I looked at him for a moment, this privileged asshole who thought he could bully his way through life, then pulled out my phone. You mean this game? I swiped to the photo album Dennis had prepared and held up the screen. James and Victoria entering the Riverside Grand Hotel. James and Victoria leaving the hotel 3 hours later. James and Victoria sharing lunch at the hotel restaurant while his wife thought he was in meetings. James went pale. Where did you get those? Public places, public photos. Amazing what you can see when you're actually looking. I swiped to the next image, a close-up of them kissing in the hotel elevator, captured by security cameras during Dennis's perfectly legal investigation. You son of a... Now, James, there's no need for name-calling. We're both adults here. Well, I looked at him pointedly. One of us is. What do you want? Want? I laughed. James, I don't want anything from you. I'm just a guy who discovered his fiancée was cheating on him and decided to document the evidence. Standard breakup stuff. Those photos are copies. I have the originals safely stored, along with credit card records showing your hotel expenses, GPS data from your phone placing you at the scene, and about 6 months' worth of circumstantial evidence that would make a divorce lawyer weep with joy. James looked around the parking lot, probably checking to see if anyone was watching us. The yacht club was emptying out, but we were visible from the main entrance. If Catherine sees those, she'll probably call her divorce attorney, who happens to be very good at asset seizure, according to my research. You bastard. Victoria said you were just some tech nerd who got lucky. Victoria says a lot of things. Like how she spent $180,000 on graduate school instead of 3 failed business ventures, or how she's not helping you hide money in shell companies to avoid tax obligations. James's eyes widened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm a debugger, James. I find problems and fix them. Right now, I'm looking at a pretty significant problem. I put my phone away and stepped closer, dropping my voice. Here's how this works. You're going to walk away from me, go home to your wife and daughters, and pretend this conversation never happened. You're not going to threaten me, follow me, or try to intimidate me again. And if I don't, then Catherine gets the photos. Your partners at the investment firm get the financial records, and the IRS gets documentation of those shell companies you've been using to hide assets. James stood there for a moment, fists clenched, probably debating whether he could take me in a fight. He was bigger than me, but I'd grown up in Hartford, not Greenwich. Different kind of tough. This isn't over, he finally said. Actually, it is. You just don't realize it yet. He stormed off toward his Mercedes, leaving me alone in the parking lot with the satisfaction of a job well done. My phone buzzed immediately. Victoria, of course. James said you have photos. We need to talk now. I screenshot the text and forwarded it to Dennis with a note. Phase 1 complete. They're rattled. Then I drove home to my empty house and started planning Phase 2. The next morning, I got a call from Patricia Knox. Alex, I have somewhat unusual news about your house purchase. Unusual how? Well, it seems Richard Wellington called this morning asking about the property. Apparently, he'd been planning to make an offer on behalf of his daughter and wanted to know if yours could be rescinded. I laughed out loud. What did you tell him? That binding contracts aren't generally subject to rescission based on family drama. Patricia's voice carried a hint of amusement. He seemed quite disappointed. I'm sure he was. There's something else. He asked quite a few questions about your financing, how you'd managed to secure funding so quickly, whether there were any contingencies he could exploit. And? I told him that wasn't information I was prepared to share. But Alex, between you and me, be careful. Richard Wellington is not a man who handles disappointment well. After I hung up, I called Dennis. Richard Wellington is sniffing around the house purchase. Thinks he can find a way to kill the deal. Let him sniff. You paid cash, no contingencies. That contract is bulletproof. What about the Bar Association investigation? Moving forward. Word is they're going to recommend formal disciplinary action within the next 60 days. And James's shell companies? I've got documentation going back 18 months. Your ex and her boyfriend have been busy little money launderers. I looked out my window at the houses of Riverside Hills, all perfectly manicured lawns and carefully maintained facades. A community built on appearances, where reputation was everything and scandal was the ultimate currency. Dennis, how would you like to get paid to destroy some reputations? I thought you'd never ask. When the partners at Wellington and Associates called an emergency meeting about Richard's financial irregularities, Tori finally understood. I hadn't just walked away from our engagement. I'd engineered the destruction of everything her family had built over 3 generations, and we were just getting started. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing code at work. Dennis, sounding more excited than I'd heard him since we started this investigation. "It's happening," he said. "Wellington and Associates just suspended Richard pending a full audit of his client accounts." I saved my work and stepped out to the hallway. "How do you know?" "Legal secretary at the firm owes me a favor. Apparently, the State Bar Association showed up yesterday with a warrant to examine his files." The partners went into crisis mode. "What kind of crisis mode?" "The kind where they're trying to figure out how to avoid criminal charges for harboring a thief. Richard's been placed on administrative leave, his access to client accounts has been frozen, and they're conducting interviews with every employee who had contact with his cases." I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction, the debugging process, reaching its logical conclusion. "Any word on the amounts?" "Bigger than we thought. Preliminary review suggests he's been skimming for almost 2 years. We're looking at potential damages north of $600,000. Richard Wellington had stolen more than $500,000 from his clients to feed his gambling addiction, and now it was all coming to light. What about Victoria? That's where it gets interesting. 3 of those shell companies we identified? They're directly linked to client accounts Richard managed. Victoria wasn't just helping James hide money, she was helping her father launder stolen funds. I walked back to my office and closed the door. Federal charges? Likely. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. The feds love cases like this. And James? Investment banker helping his girlfriend hide stolen money? His firm's going to cut him loose the minute this goes public. I hung up and called Patricia Knox. "Patricia, Alex Morrison. I wanted to check on the status of my house closing. Everything's proceeding smoothly. We're scheduled for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Any more calls from Richard Wellington?" Patricia paused. "Actually, yes. He called again yesterday, this time asking about title insurance and whether there were any liens or encumbrances that might affect the sale. Getting desperate." "I'd say so. Alex, I don't usually comment on client situations, but Richard Wellington seems unusually interested in preventing this sale. Don't worry about Richard. He's got bigger problems than my real estate transactions." That evening, I drove past the Wellington estate on my way home from work. 3 cars in the driveway I didn't recognize, including one that looked suspiciously like an unmarked police vehicle. My phone rang as I was making dinner. "Victoria." "Alex, please. We need to talk." "No, we don't. My father's in trouble. Someone's been feeding information to the Bar Association, making accusations. Someone's been telling the truth. There's a difference." "You bastard. This is about the money thing, isn't it?" "The co-signing?" I set down my spatula and leaned against the counter. "Victoria, this stopped being about money the day I found out about James." Silence. "You know about James?" "I know about James, the hotel room, the shell companies, and the 6 months of lies you've been telling everyone, including his wife. Those photos, how did you—" "I hired a professional." Amazing what you can learn when you actually try. "Alex, listen to me. Whatever you think you know, I know you've been helping your father hide stolen money. I know you've been committing tax fraud with your married boyfriend. And I know you thought I was stupid enough to co-sign loan documents that would make me liable for crimes I didn't commit." Another silence, longer this time. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can. Federal prosecutors are going to find my evidence very compelling." "You asshole." "Victoria, I'm going to give you some free advice. Get a criminal defense attorney. Get one today. And make sure it's not someone from your father's firm, because they're about to have their own problems." I hung up and went back to cooking dinner. The next morning, I woke up to find my driveway blocked by James Blackwood's Mercedes. He was leaning against the driver's door, looking like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said, as I walked out to get my mail. "No, we don't. My wife filed for divorce yesterday." I looked at him, rumpled suit, bloodshot eyes, the kind of desperate edge that comes from watching your entire life collapse in real time. "Sorry to hear that." She took the kids to her mother's house, froze all the joint accounts, had divorce papers served at my office in front of 3 partners. "Sounds unpleasant. You did this. You sent her those photos." Actually, I hadn't. Catherine Blackwood had hired her own investigator after becoming suspicious of her husband's sudden need to work late every night. But James didn't need to know that. "James, I'm going to explain something to you. Your wife didn't leave you because of photos. She left you because you're a cheating, lying thief who thought he was too smart to get caught. I never stole anything. You helped Victoria hide money that her father stole from client accounts. Money that should have gone to pay legal settlements and trust fund disbursements. You helped them launder federal crime proceeds." James's face went white. "I didn't know. You knew enough. You knew Victoria was hiding income from tax authorities. You knew she had debt obligations she couldn't meet through legitimate means. You just didn't care because you thought rich people don't face consequences. What do you want?" I walked back toward my house. "I don't want anything from you, James. You've already given me everything I need. The shell companies, if I testified that Victoria coerced me. Victoria coerced you into sleeping with her too?" James stood there in my driveway, a 42-year-old man with 2 daughters and a wife who'd trusted him, realizing that his privileged life was over. "This isn't finished," he said finally. "Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet." That afternoon, Dennis called with the news I'd been waiting for. Richard Wellington's been arrested. Wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. They picked him up at his office an hour ago. Federal charges? State and federal. The feds are handling the money laundering. Connecticut is prosecuting the theft. Victoria's been named as a co-conspirator in 3 separate indictments. I leaned back in my office chair, watching my co-workers go about their normal Thursday afternoon routines, unaware that 3 people who'd tried to destroy my financial future, we are now facing criminal prosecution. What about James? His firm fired him this morning. Something about conduct inconsistent with our ethical standards. Translation: they found out about the money laundering and cut him loose before it affects their reputation. Criminal charges? Not yet, but he's been named as a person of interest in the federal investigation. I hung up and called Patricia Knox one more time. "Patricia, I wanted to confirm our closing is still scheduled for Tuesday." "Absolutely. Though I should mention we had one more call from Richard Wellington's office. His secretary asking about postponing the closing due to family circumstances." "What did you tell her?" "That binding contracts don't generally allow for postponements based on criminal indictments." I laughed. "You said that?" Not in those exact words, but the sentiment was clear. Tuesday morning, I signed the papers and took possession of the house Victoria Wellington had dreamed of owning for 2 years. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through rooms she'd mentally decorated a dozen times. The master suite where she'd planned to host charity committee meetings, the kitchen where she'd imagined catering elegant dinner parties, the study where she thought she'd manage her successful consulting business, the one that had never actually existed. Now it was mine, and she was facing federal charges. My phone had been buzzing all morning with congratulations from neighbors, real estate agents, and yacht club members. The Riverside Hills Gossip Network was working overtime, and owning the most coveted house in town had instantly elevated my social status from Victoria's tech boyfriend to that successful entrepreneur who bought the Heights house. It was amazing how money changed people's perception. That evening I was arranging furniture in my new living room when Dennis called. "You need to see the evening news. Channel 8 is running a story about the Wellington investigation." I turned on the television to see a perfectly coiffed reporter standing in front of Wellington and Associates, explaining how a prominent Riverside Hills attorney had been arrested for embezzling client funds to support a gambling addiction. Richard Wellington, a partner at the prestigious law firm Wellington and Associates, was taken into custody yesterday on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Federal prosecutors allege Wellington stole more than $600,000 from client accounts over an 18-month period to cover gambling debts at area casinos. The camera cut to file footage of Richard entering the courthouse, looking nothing like the arrogant bully who'd tried to intimidate me into co-signing Victoria's debt. Wellington's daughter, Victoria Wellington, has also been charged as a co-conspirator in the alleged money laundering scheme. Sources close to the investigation suggest the younger Wellington helped hide stolen funds through a series of shell companies designed to avoid tax obligations. I poured myself a bourbon and settled in to watch my ex-fiancée's life implode on live television. The investigation began following a complaint filed with the State Bar Association earlier this year. Wellington and Associates has announced they are cooperating fully with federal authorities and have suspended Richard Wellington pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. The reporter wrapped up with the standard legal disclaimers about presumption of innocence, but the damage was done. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Riverside Hills would know that the Wellington family, old money, established society, 3 generations of legal prominence, had been built on theft and lies. My phone rang immediately. Victoria, of course. "You destroyed my family," she said without preamble. "Your family destroyed itself. I just documented the evidence. That complaint to the Bar Association, that was you. That complaint to the Bar Association was a concerned citizen reporting potential criminal activity. Exactly what any responsible person would do." Responsible person? Victoria's voice was shaking with rage. "You vindictive piece of shit, you've ruined everything we worked for." "We didn't work for anything. Your father stole it, you helped him hide it, and James helped you both commit federal crimes. I just made sure the authorities found out. I loved you. No, you loved the idea of having someone stupid enough to co-sign your debt while you slept with your married boyfriend in hotel rooms. James and I, that's not... Victoria, save it for your criminal defense attorney. You're going to need all the practice you can get." I hung up and blocked her number, 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 her number.